All right, welcome everybody. Let's delve into your Bernina 4, 5, and 7 series machines. So we are operating down here from Gayle's basement. Bear with us. Today's class is just an introduction to your Bernina touchscreen machines. So that's for today, it's going to be the 4, 5, and 7 series machines. We have other sections that we'll do on the 8 series and the 215 and the 3 series machines. So bear with us there. They're a little bit different and kind of require another version of this class. So today's machine that I'm working on is a Bernina 770 Quilters Edition machine. I am working on the Tula Pink edition. That is my personal machine, which is down here in my house at Command Central. So let's get started. So we're going to work through a PowerPoint presentation today that was created by the Bernina of America Education Department. I think that it's better than anything that I would put together. So, but sometimes, just looking through something, you need a little commentary. So that's what we're going to do. I will pop over to my machine to show you bobbin winding, putting in a bobbin, and threading the needle threader. I think sometimes it's kind of good to see the tactile aspect of that. Then finally, we'll sign off, and I'll work on the 8 series and the 2 and the 3 series classes. So let's get started. I'm going to share my screen here. So this is, let's talk a little bit about preparing to stitch. So if you're sitting at home with a brand new machine, take that baby out of the box. Like, what are you waiting for? It's really easy. You're going to unpack everything, lay everything that came with your machine out. And first and foremost, it's going to need to be plugged in to the back of the machine and then plugged into a power supply. You're going to insert the freehand lever. That is the metal piece that comes out of your machine. I am just going to switch it back on myself here for just a second, because I'm going to undo this little guy. This is the freehand system. This goes into the front of your machine, and then you use your leg, and as Tiffany Pratt would say, it's like you're high-fiving your sewing machine. Really what this is doing, it's working a mechanism that raises and lowers the presser foot. This is really, really important for those of you that have the 5, 7, and 8 series machines with the dual feed in the back, because you don't have a presser foot lifter back there. So you need to have some other kind of mechanical thing, I think, to be able to raise and lower the presser foot. There are other ways to do it, but discipline yourself and get used to using that. All right, sorry for interrupting. So in addition, you want to make sure that you have the proper stitch plate on your machine. The stitch plate that comes with your machine is, if you have a Bernina 435, 475, 535, or 720 machine, you have a 5.5 stitch plate, 5.5 millimeters wide. If you have the 8 series or a 7 series machine, or the 590 or the 570, any of the machines that do 9 millimeter, then you will need a 9 millimeter stitch plate on your machine. Now, there's also a stitch plate available, and that stitch plate is a straight stitch needle plate. I have a picture of that later on in this presentation, but you want to make sure that that is removed if you've been doing embroidery or something like that. We are only going to be working with the presser foot number 1C on my machine today, but those of you that have the 475, 435, and 535 machines, you're going to be using the number 1 foot. The number 1 foot is just like the 1C, only much like that needle plate, the number 1 foot can only accommodate 5.5 millimeter wide stitching. And then the B880 will automatically raise and lower the presser foot depending on what feed or if the embroidery module is on or not. But the rest of us have a manual release for the feed dogs. So make sure that your feed dogs are up. And I just want to give you a reminder that if your feed dogs are down and you press in the feed dogs to raise them up, they don't automatically pop up. The machine has to take its first stitch for them to pop up. So it's not just about the machine. There are lots of things that will ensure that your sewing experience is a good one. And one of those is making sure that you know about needles. Now, there are all kinds of needles out there in the universe. There is the ones that we use mostly in our demonstrator machines at Bernina of Naperville are a size 80 sharp needle, the Microtech sharp needles. But let's talk a little bit about the anatomy of a needle. First of all, our needles that go into the Bernina machines have a round front and a flat back to the shank. That ensures that when we put the needle in, that we're going to get it in just the right way. You don't want to use there's some industrial needles out there that have like a totally round shank. Those are not appropriate for our machines. At the store, we carry the Bernina needles. We also carry Schmetz needles, and all of the needles are available through our website at www.berninaofnaperville.com, or you can actually call in if you want some needles, and we can pick just the right kind out for you and ship directly to your house for you. In addition to the shank of the needle, there's also the point of the needle. So points are different for different fabric types. There's a universal needle, which is what comes in your machine. Think of a universal needle as like a point that is jack of all trades but master of none. It will penetrate the material and it'll make a stitch, but for some fibers that are tightly woven, batiks are a good example of that. The universal needles kind of make the stitching look a little zigzaggy. So if you are experiencing that, you might want to try one of the Microtech sharp needles. There's also other needles that are different pointed. Like I mentioned, there's the sharps. There's also embroidery needles that are pointy. They have a very nice sharp point. There's denim needles and there's quilting needles. Now, what separates the embroidery and the denim and the quilting needles from the sharp needles is pretty much the scarf that's on the back behind the eye of the needle. So if you look at this diagram that has the picture of the needle there, the scarf on the back of the needle, they have different lengths depending on what type of needle it is. And so the longer the scarf, the longer it takes the needle to penetrate the material and form a loop underneath. So if you are doing quilting or you're sewing through thicker material like denim, you're going to want a needle that has a longer scarf because you're going through a longer distance from the top part of that fabric to the bottom part of your lower fabric. The eye of the needle can also be different depending on what type of needle you have. There is a large eye needle, and the large eye needles are like the Metallica needles or the top stitch needles that are designed for fussy thread or thicker thread. There's also I want to go back to points for just a moment because there's also ballpoint points, and those are for the ballpoint needles are for materials that are knit, so that you don't want to penetrate the fibers of a knit or else you'll get a run. So for those type of materials, you'll want to use a ballpoint needle. The needles are going to need to be changed after every 4 to 6 hours of sewing, or if you hear a popping sound, it's probably a dull needle. And honestly, one of the biggest rules that you need to learn or discipline yourself to not do is sew over pins, because the minute that needle strikes a pin, you need to remove it and you need to change it. And that's just not a safe thing to do. The debris could fly and hit you in the face, or you just don't want to do that. And obviously it can damage your machine as well. If you want to learn a little bit more about needles, please reference your workbook that Chris has made available on our website, and he actually put a link to it in the stream. So you can reference the needle in more detail about the different types of needles on pages 51 and 52 of the manual, of the Mastering Your Bernina Sewing Machine Manual. And there it is, a copy, kind of more information than what I just gave you. So general thread information, it is the most important thing is just to remember this, the Berninas are a high quality sewing machine, so you don't really want to put cheapy thread in your machine. And there's a few reasons for that. cheapy thread tends to not have a long staple. A long staple is the length of the fibers that get twisted in to make the thread. So if you are buying like the bargain thread for like $1 in the bargain bin, more than likely that's a very short staple. The thread tends to be really fuzzy, and it just makes it so that you have to clean out your machine more often. And it's just it's not nice. And then sometimes when you're using cheap thread too, you'll see the little dust bunnies that collect off the thread and then they land on your project. Another thing to remember is needle sizes. They can range. 80 is kind of a medium size, but there are thinner needles and there are also thicker needles. And if you're using a very fine, thin thread, then you're probably going to go smaller than a size 80 needle. You're going to need to maybe go down to a 70. Any needle that's smaller than a 70 is not going to perform well with the needle threader, so just be mindful of that. But you should, the advice I'm giving you here is for general sewing. Now, we do kind of bend the rules a little bit when we talk about decorative stitching and embroidery, but that will be covered in the Learning Your Embroidery Machine presentation. Another thing that is important, I feel, is to think about what the materials of what you're sewing are. So I do a lot of garment sewing, I do a lot of quilting, and I do a lot of costuming. So with those three interests, I might be using anything from polyester to rayon to cotton, and it is always a good idea, in my opinion, to match natural fibers with natural fibers and artificial fabrics like polyester with polyester. But the threads these days have greatly improved, and I do see some cross-pollination out there. And so, but just be a little bit mindful. I think you'll always get the best result if you match your like fibers together. Another thing that you want to be mindful of is not only do you want to have the weight of the thread compatible with the size of your needle, but the weight of the thread should be compatible with the weight of the fabric. Cotton lawn, for instance, very thin, supple material like a Liberty of London type material. I wouldn't really want to use anything larger than a 50 weight thread on something like that. That kind of, well, it can cause puckering. The thread will be very obvious on the material. So have that in mind. Also, very thin thread is not going to perform well with denim and canvases and things like that. So thick material, thicker thread, thin material, thinner thread. And there's more information about this on your workbook on page 53. My final public service announcement about thread is if you have thread that's on a styrofoam spool or a wooden spool, I think that it's time for that to go in the display cabinet and not through your machine. Be wary of giant thread sales or things like that. It's just, if it looks old, it might not be a good idea to put it into your machine. So preparing to stitch, the first thing that you're going to want to do when you prepare to stitch is wind a bobbin. And so I am going to switch over to another camera that's showing the top of my sewing machine, and I'm going to show you the bobbin winding path for this. So give me one moment, please. All right, here we are. So here are my hands. Never be a hand model with these. It's so dry. Been washing my hands so much, and I hope you've been washing your hands too. All right, here's the top of the machine, and I have an Aurifil thread. This is a 50 weight, all 100% cotton thread on my machine, and I know that there's some of you out there looking at what have you done with this machine. If you look at my thread here, I did have to use a large spool cap because we're camping down here, ladies and gentlemen, and I don't have my small spool cap, my little tiny little nubbin, because that's normally how I would put the thread on the machine. I don't have my small spool cap, and I don't have my medium spool cap, so I'm trying to make do with what I have. But I'm going to show you the right way to do things here. So This little guy is the foam pad, and the foam pad is going to go wherever the thread goes. So you can see here on the side of the machine, there's also a vertical spool pin. Now the vertical spool pin, if I were going to put my thread there, I could line it up and do like that, and that would be fine. But do you see how this thread is cross wound? It is generally recommended that if the thread is cross wound like this, it goes on horizontally. There's other thread that's stacked. When I like I said, I'm camping and I don't really see that I have any stacked thread in my, oh, I do. I found some. Woo! All right. So this is stacked thread. It's when it's wound, it doesn't make that V. That thread would definitely go onto the machine like this. Word of warning here, do not store thread on your vertical spool pin, and that includes filled bobbins, because there are so many times at the store, the service department, Chris is monitoring the speed, he can vouch for me, the thread gets sucked down under the hand wheel and it'll just pull all that thread. And it's amazing how long you can sew collecting thread under the flywheel before the machine will actually stop sewing properly. So just don't even cause that problem. Get in the habit, if you're not going to use this vertical spool pin, put it down, put your foam pad back here, and forget that it's there. If there's no thread that's going to be winding a bobbin or being fed through the machine over here, don't use it. All right, so normally when we would put our thread like this Aurifil here, you can see it's got like this little hole that is a little bit bigger than our spool pin here. There is a small spool cap that fits through there, and it'll pop right in there. So if you have your accessories case handy for your Bernina machine, you're going to notice a little tiny white spool cap that's about the size of your pinky. If you have another thread that is similar in size to this spool would go on like this. And I kind of think of it going on like toilet paper. Remember when we all had toilet paper and we put it on and it would come over like this, and there's always the argument in the house, does it go this way or does it go under? We're going to have the thread coming off like this, and then you'll put the medium spool cap. The medium spool cap is the one in between this size and the little itty bitty one, and you would put it on like this, and you want to put the thread on so it doesn't spin. Oh, and I've lost my foam pad. It went down there somewhere, probably never to be seen again. Hang on. Isn't live TV wonderful, ladies and gentlemen? I think I'm going to have to go under. Well, let's pretend that I used my foam pad. It's not there. My foam pad ran away, so I have to go back to the shop to get another one. But in the meantime, let's pretend it's there. All right, so once you get your thread on the back of the machine, I have my machine threaded, so I'm just going to cut it here. There's a little cutter on the bobbin winder, and I'm pulling my thread through the machine. You always want to pull from the needle down through the machine as long as you can reach it. That way you're not putting stress on your check spring. So now my thread, I'm going to wind my bobbin, and the Bernina 4, 5, and 7 series machines use these jumbo bobbins, which hold about 2.5 times some of the bobbins out there. So you can sew on one of these for a very long time. So we're going to put the bobbin in, and look how you have one side has these reflectors and one side doesn't. The way that I try to remember to put the thread on the machine properly is that our disco reflection goes down. So disco down on the bobbin winder. Now we're going to go behind this little chrome clip. We're going to go clockwise around the bobbin tensioner, and then we're going to wrap about 5 times around our bobbin, cut on this little thread cutter, and engage the bobbin winder. And now if you don't want to wind it all the way, you can just disengage the bobbin winder and it'll stop and you can remove the bobbin. But if you want a full bobbin, you can wind it and then it will stop automatically. All right, while it's winding, guess what I found? I found my foam pad. It's going to be a great day. All right, bobbin's done. I'm going to cut, take off my spool here, and redo. There we go. Oh my gosh, I was very worried about my foam pad. All right, so that is winding a bobbin. And now we're going to thread the machine, or thread the bobbin case first. So let me show you how that's going to happen. When you take your bobbin out, I have some diagrams in the handout to show you how to do this, but you just are going to be pushing, if this is your bobbin case area, you're going to push that little silver piece just there like that, and the bobbin will pop out. But notice that the bobbin's not falling out, just holding it there. So this is where you're going to take your fingernail and you take your bobbin case out. Now, just like we did the disco down to put the thread on the bobbin winder, we're going to do disco down to put our thread in the bobbin case. And then you're going to just take the thread and run it around the bobbin case until it gets down into that groove under the spring. And so there, that's how our thread is threaded, our bobbin is threaded. And then it's going to go into the machine kind of with, this is going to be parallel to your sewing table when you put it into the bobbin area. So that means that this little finger that's coming up here isn't going to go straight up like this. It's going to go off to the side, and this remains parallel with the bottom of your, with the top of your table. Okay, so let me show you some visuals over here. So here is inserting the bobbin. You can see here that we've got the first step, the shiny side is going into the bobbin. Then that thread is coming through that groove. It's going under that flat spring, and then it's also going to come around and go through these two guides there. Then you open the bobbin door on your machine. You're going to place the bobbin in with that metal piece totally horizontal to your sewing table. And then once you insert it, there's a little thread cutter on the side of your machine. You're going to take the thread, line it up on that, close the door, and pull the thread away. Now, if you have a machine that has the bobbin sensor on it, then you want to make sure that you close your bobbin door before you start sewing, or you're going to get an error message telling you that you're out of bobbin thread. All right, so I've just done that on my machine. All right, so now we're going to need to, hang on a second, we're going to need to thread the needle with our thread, and you can see that's the bird's eye view there. So I'm going to do this on my machine that's right over here. Oop. It's a weird thing here because I have to click into my program or else it keeps advancing me through the presentation. So here we go. All right. All right, so you want to remove the thread from around the bobbin tensioner. The thread goes under this guide, and then you want to make sure, this is a very important step, that your presser foot is up. And so we can do that a couple different ways. I know I gave you the lecture on the freehand system, but when you use the freehand system, that will only raise the presser foot temporarily. As long as you've got your knee into that high-fiving position with the freehand system, it stays up. But once you close your knee, lock your knees closer together, then the presser foot goes down again. So if you have a machine that doesn't have the presser foot lifter back here, please make sure that you raise the presser foot on the front of the machine with the presser foot lifter button that's on the front of the machine. So now my tension discs are open. They live right in this spot right here. So then I'm going to go down through those tension discs. And now I'm going to advance the slide, and then I'm going to change cameras so that you can see the front of the sewing machine. So what I just did here is I put the thread behind point A and then down through the tension discs here. Now we're going to move on to this section where the thread is going to go down here. This is the thread guard, so that dotted line is not seen. Then you're going to make a U-turn where you go down to, you go back the right side and down the left side, and that'll put the thread in this little piece called the thread take up. This little piece goes up and down. And one thing to be mindful of, if you are a hand wheel turner, your needle might not be exactly in the right position for threading. And I'm going to show you that now as I switch to another camera here. Here we are. Hello, there's my 770. So the thread is going to come down through this section here. It's going to go under the thread take up, and it's really hard to see right here. I'm going to see if I can shine my flashlight on this. But in there is a thread take up. And now there's a couple different ways that you can get your thread take up lever to be in just the right spot. And to ensure that you are doing that, you can press the needle up down button that's right on the front of your machine. That's the burp. Don't worry about that. That's the stepping motors engaging and everything, because I have not done a stitch on my machine yet this morning. That was my very first stitch. So now, as you can see, the needle is all the way in the down position there. Now I'm going to press this again, and it's ensuring that my thread take up, it's right there where that spotlight is on my with my light that I'm shining. So my thread take up is indeed in the right position. So now I've got this down here. I'm going up here. I'm going to the right and down the left. I'm also going to make sure that I lift my presser foot again so I can pull my thread freely. The thread will not pull freely if the presser foot's down, because when the presser foot's down, the tension discs would be like this when the presser foot's up. When the presser foot's down, they lock into place and they hold the thread in the perfect tension for doing your sewing. So now I am going down through here. There's a guide right here. And then there's a guide. Now, it depends on what machine you have. If you have a 4 series, you have a little wire over here that you need to get it behind. And I think that's also the same with the 5 series. But my 7 series, my additional guide is over there on that side. So that is getting the machine threaded, and now we're ready to put it through the needle. And I want you to know that the needle threader works really well on these machines, but you have 2 things that you need to be mindful of. And I want to talk to you directly about this. So the needle threader does not work nicely if you do not insert your needle into the highest position. A lot of times when you undo the screw, and there's 2 different kinds of screws. The 4 series and the 5 series have a little black finger tight screw on them, and the 7 and 8 series require a special tool to take the needle out. So this is the little guy for your 7 and 8 series. You need this. But you want to undo the screw. Don't take the screw all the way out, but loosen it quite a bit so that you can make sure that you're putting your needle all the way up, because if the needle's not all the way up, then as you use that needle threader, the wire that goes from the back of the needle through the hole with a little hook on it will get stuck on the needle flat part, bend the hook, and then the needle threader doesn't work, and then you're not a happy sewer. So I'm going to I think I'm not supposed to say sewer. I think it's a sewist. Nonetheless, you will not be happy if you bend your needle threader. So let me show you a little picture of using the needle threader. All right. So there is a little lever here that you're going to push with your left finger. So you are only going to touch this with your left finger. You are not allowed to touch it with your right finger. Those are Gayle's rules. So you're going to lower the presser foot. You're going to press down the lever with your left hand. You're going to put the thread in the side hook in the wire hook. That makes no sense. I'm going to show you in person so that you can see. But there's a little finger that comes down on this needle threader. You're going to pull your thread at the same time. You're going to hold your thread in your right hand at the same time that you're holding the lever down with your left hand, and you're going to get that thread wrapped around that little plastic finger. This picture does not have the right needle threader on it, but it goes under there, then it goes straight across the street, and then right here is where the hook is going through the eye of the needle to grab this thread and pull it back through the back to make this little loop. So that is all of the stuff that's happening while we're using the needle threader. So I am going to give this a try here on the front of the machine with a camera in my lap. This is really going to be a test of my dexterity here, ladies and gentlemen. So okay. Let me move that camera down for you. I'm also going to turn my sewing light off. I think that's going to be easier for you to see, honestly. So I'm going to try to move the camera forward. Okay, I'm kind of liking this. Okay, that's as low as I can get it. Okay. So and let me move these guys out of the way. All right, so here's the finger. See that little plastic finger, and see how I am only touching this with my left hand. So I'm going to go under this little plastic piece. I'm pushing firmly, really firmly down. You can actually feel the wire going into the needle if you push this guy down far enough. Now I'm going directly across the street. The thread is going into this little slot that's right here. So the thread is totally parallel to the top of the machine arm. And now I'm going back there. I can feel it get stuck on that wire. Now I'm bringing very little slack on this thread, and you can see that it's stuck on that wire because my thread I'm pulling towards the camera here, and now I'm letting go, and it has threaded the machine, and I can just take my left finger and pull that thread through the machine just like that. And I'm just going to tuck it under the foot, and now I'm going to cut. I hope that made sense to you. I hope that you had success, or you will have success when you give that a try. Next, it's time to look at some other things. So let's go back to our presentation. So we've mastered the needle threader. We want to attach the feet. So let's talk about the different feet. And they're right here just to kind of show you. We've got when we talk about the Bernina 215 and the Bernina 3 series, they come with snap-on feet. They have a shank that goes onto the machine that is removable, and if you buy specialty feet, you can buy them all in one shank like this. But then the Bernina 535, the Bernina 435, the Bernina 475 take the feet that do not have these magic eyeballs on them. Back in the day, I used to say they were feet on steroids, but now I call them the magic eyeball. This is a regular 20 that would go on a 5.5 millimeter machine. This foot is a 1C. That's what I've got on my machine right now. The 1C is going to allow me to do 9 millimeter wide stitching, and this little eye is going to line up to a sensor in the top of the underneath the machine, and that tells the machine that it is safe to do a 9 millimeter wide stitch. There's a different kind of foot for those of you that have the 570, 590, 790 machines, and that is the dual feed foot. So the dual feed feet have they say the number of the type of foot it is. This is the reverse pattern foot, and it has a D after it. So that would be the 1D foot. And see how the shank on this is different because it has a straddle to accommodate that Bernina dual feed. So these are the basic feet that you're going to be removing and attaching onto your machine. And there is a picture of the different feet again. And then here's a picture of the actual dual feed foot in action with the dual feed. So you can see here this little guy, this little bit comes, you just wipe your hand down the back of the machine to engage that. So you're going to put the foot on first, then you're going to pull that Bernina dual feed down into place. And if you have any questions on the Bernina feet, there's a couple resources for you. I know we're in kind of business unusual times right now, but you could order the big book of feet from us, and we will ship to you. Remember, we're BERNINA of Naperville.com. You can also go to BERNINA.com and search accessories, and BERNINA.com has all of their YouTube videos loaded under the information for each foot. It really is a great source to see an actual human putting the feet on the machine and using them. So those are two really good sources. Obviously, a third source would be to check out our other Twitch TV videos at BERNINA of Naperville. We have a miscellaneous magic class where we're using the 7 tailor tacked foot and some other feet, and we're going to be adding to those as well. But remember, BERNINA has great resources, and we're very lucky to be able to tap into those to provide you some sewing tips and tricks during our shelter at home days. A lot of times before you sew, you're going to want to attach the slide-on tray. And I'm just trying to get out of here. There we go. And if we look here, you can see that I've got the slide-on tray on my machine here. There is a button that will release it that allows you to take it off the machine like so. And when you put the table on, you just want to make sure that everything is nice and flush here and nice and flat. And you might need to give your machine just a little hug to snug it on there tightly. But that's how the tray will remove and attach. This will also, when you take this off, it exposes the free arm of the machine. Now, stitch selection on the machine is fairly easy. This screen capture, I believe, is from a BERNINA 790, but the 770 is very similar. So the stitch selection is when you turn on the machine, you're going to start off with a straight stitch. So you don't have to worry about selecting a straight stitch when you start off. It's going to be selected for you, and you can tell two ways. First of all, there's the straight stitch showing there on the left side of the screen, but then also there's kind of a white halo around the stitch, and that indicates which stitch you've actually chosen. There's another way to view stitches. So you saw we were in our practical stitch menu. That's what this little straight stitch and zigzag portion is up here. But you also have other different banks of stitches here. So there is the decorative stitches, and there's a lot in the decorative stitch bank. So you actually hit this decorative stitch and you'll get into different folders. This is the 100 group folder, and you can see down here that you can either scroll. If you have a 5 series or a 7 series, you're just going to push and hold and drag up to see the stitches. You can also use this little tab here that expands it so that you get a much larger selection of stitches to see all at one time right here on the screen like that. As we go down this side of the machine, there are other things. Now, on the 880, 790, 590, and 570 machines, every time you change your foot, you're going to have to tell it what foot you're using. So if I had been using a number 4 foot, I would need at this point to change it back to our 1C, or if I'm doing a zipper, I'd have to tell it I'm using the 4 foot and so forth. And you would open this. That opens the screen here, and then you select the foot that you're using. as you can see here, when we select our foot number 4 and we're going for a straight stitch, this is red because our zipper foot does not allow us to do a straight stitch down the center. We have to move the needle position over. So you can see here, as I move the needle position over to the right, now the stitching is showing up white, and now it is safe to use the number 4 foot. So that is how that presser foot recognition function when we hit the presser foot works. We have a safety precaution for our own good here, and this is 2 things. This is the needle plate and also the needle. So there are different, in my needle dirge earlier, I failed to mention to you that there are also double needles and triple needles and wing needles with a regular needle. You'll learn about that as your days of sewing progress. But on here, there are all of these different needle choices. And if I pick any of these, like this is a 2.6 millimeter wide double needle, then it's going to limit the stitch width capability of my machine. Because if this were centered on here, and I then took a decorative stitch that's wider, we don't want one of these needles to clip the edge of our foot. So this is a safety precaution. I talked to you about straight stitch needle plates. This one pictured here means that this particular setup for this machine had the straight stitch needle plate on it, where you wouldn't be able to do a decorative stitch with that on there. You'd have to make sure that you physically take this straight stitch needle plate off and put the 9 millimeter one on, and then also tell the machine that it's safe, your 9 millimeter plate is back on the machine. And then here are the pictures that I promised you of the straight stitch needle plate. There's also even a 5.5 wide needle plate for the 9 millimeter machines. And we do have a class that covers that. It's called Off the Edge Stitching. We'll probably be doing that one live soon. But in the meantime, these are the different needle plates. This one allows you just to do a straight stitch. And that's what we're referring to there. So there's an I menu on the machine. So when you are in your stitch selection screen and you pick a stitch, if you hit this button right here, this I button, you're going to see a menu that looks very similar to this. And in this case, the stitch that has been chosen is stitch 401. And you can see that in here. And then I think this is somewhere else in the presentation, but I also want to tell you, there are going to be times when I'm shouting out stitch numbers to you at home and you're going to be like, how do I do that? This little magnifying glass, if you click that, you type in the stitch that I've given you, you say okay, and you can dial the stitch numbers in that way. In this menu, we have pattern end, mirror vertical, mirror horizontal, balance, pattern elongate, basting, decorative multi-motion stitching, and so forth. That is not available on all the machines, but each machine will have something in this little I menu here. But what I want to point out to you are the reverse stitches and the different things here. So we can go in continuous reverse. Literally, we can sew backwards if we wanted to. It has a backstepping feature. So if we're doing like a decorative stitch and we want it to go backwards to secure it and go and retrace the needle penetration marks that the machine just made, that's what backstepping is. Saving a stitch permanently is where we can actually take the stitch, make it narrower or longer, increase or move the needle position, have pattern end engaged. If we hit this little floppy disk button, that will actually save the stitch permanently. So if you turn the sewing machine off and back on again and select this stitch, it will remember those changes. And then of course, there's always a way to undo something. If you save a stitch permanently and you don't want to keep it permanently, you can unsave it. Kind of like an undo. It'll go back to the defaults, the original default setting of the stitch. Now, my favorite combination of features on the machine is the needle stop up down using the freehand system. Now, this to me is Bernina has come out with so many innovations, so many different features that I want on a new machine, but this is still something that in every class that I do, people really enjoy this and enjoy the fact that this will really let you keep your hands on your work so that you can be as precise as possible with your piecing, with your quilting, top stitching, and decorative stitching. So the needle stop up down is where every time you stop sewing, the needle's going to land in the down position. And I'm just going to cycle back through here. If you look at this little icon right here, see how the needle is down into the material? That means every time we stop sewing, the needle's going to land in the down position. And that will save. If you turn the machine off and then turn it back on again, it'll just remember the adjustment that you made the last time you were sewing. If you don't like that feature, you can touch this button again and the needle will be showing up above this horizon line, and that means the needle is in the stopping in the up position. But this feature with the knee lever is going to let you raise your presser foot, put your needle down, and pivot your work to get perfect stitches. So let's talk about lowering your presser foot for sewing, particularly on these machines that do not have a presser foot lifter. So we mean the Bernina 570 and up. From the 570 on, that is the first machine that has the Bernina dual feed, up through the 590, 740, 770, 790, and 880. All of those machines have several different ways that the foot can be lowered, and you can even customize certain buttons to have them do exactly what you want. So the foot is going to lower when you press on the foot control. So that's like the first thing. So you can just put your material under the foot and then put the foot control down and it's going to lower. You can also program the foot to lift automatically by pressing the securing button, or if you press the thread cutter button, it will cut and lift the presser foot for you once you're finished sewing. And you can lower or lift the foot with a button on the machine, and the default is going to give you 15 millimeter clearance, but you can also program that as well. So I want you to know that we do have a programming pizzazz class that is on our Twitch feed. It's one of our stored pre-recorded Twitch videos. It was our first video that we did, so it's a little raw, but I think that this would still be helpful for you. So if you want to learn more about programming the different external buttons that you see here on the machine, please watch that video. It is very informative, but it was before we got this multi-camera angles and everything. So bear with us. We're still learning. So let's switch over to our sewing machine. And I'm just going to turn this a little bit here, and I'm going to grab some material and I'm going to put in my freehand system. And I actually have to move the machine just a little bit closer. And I'm going to move my camera just a little bit as well. I think that might be good. Now, okay. I'm trying to sit so you can see the machine and not my beautifully curled hair that I curled for you this morning. So I'm going to line my material up, right sides together. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a seam. Now, if you're a quilter, you're going to like a 1/4 inch seam allowance. If you're a crafter or a garment sewer or whatever, you're going to be probably looking for something somewhere in between 5/8 and 1/2 inch. Now, did you see? Now, you can't see what's happening here, but you can sort of see this bar wiggling. I'm raising and lowering my presser foot with my freehand system, just like this. And now I'm going to do a seam. And I'm using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And now I can lift the presser foot temporarily. I can use the heel to bring my needle up, so the foot control has a heel tap function. I can bring the needle up, I can raise my presser foot, I can pull the fabric away and cut over here on the side of the machine. Another thing that I can do, let's pretend I'm doing another seam. Let's say my presser foot is up. See how I used this button and I was able to raise the presser foot? When I get started sewing, I can actually just, and there are lines on this needle plate. There are lines that show our seam allowance all the way from 1/4 to like 7/8 of an inch here, but there are also horizontal lines on here, and one of them, the one in the front, is exactly where the needle goes into the needle plate. Then there's another one 1/8 of an inch back that actually is just a little bit beyond where the machine is sewing, or where the needle starts. And then the other one back there is about 5/8 of an inch behind the needle. So I just want you to pay attention to those markings. I'm so used to using the knee lever, but this is the example I want to show you. Okay, so the presser foot is up, and I'm getting ready to sew. So I've lined my material up on my 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. I've got it right up to where it's just going to be just under the needle, and now I'm just pushing on the foot control, and you can see how that lowered the presser foot, and now I'm ready to stitch. Now, another example is if we needed to pivot or we needed to do something like that. My needle's landing in the down position. I'm using the knee lever, and that's allowing me to sew, stop, lift, sew, stop, lift. There's a lot of different ways that I can pivot and really maneuver this material, and you can see I'm not even really holding the material because the machine is doing such a good job of everything for me. So I'm going to press the thread cutter, and now that cuts the thread, lifts it, and I can pull my work away, and you can see my stitching there. And so there, as a reminder, are buttons on the screen that show the machine landing with the needle in the up position or landing with the needle in the down position. There's also ways to secure your stitching. There's obviously doing a straight stitch and then using the quick reverse button that's on the front of the machine. There's also a securing program that is stitch number 5 that's going to do 5 stitches forward, 5 stitches backwards. Then it's going to continue to stitch until you press the quick reverse button, but don't hold it in, just press it, and that goes 5 stitches backwards, 5 stitches forward, and slows down and stops. There's additionally a quilter securing stitch. So if you have a 7 or 8 series, it's stitch number 1324. If you have a 4 or a 5 series, it's stitch number 1301. And actually, I'm going to do that one for you just now. So the first one I'm going to do is our regular securing stitch, and I'm going to be using this quick reverse button right here. So I'm on a straight stitch, and I'm just going to line up here. It doesn't matter exactly what I'm doing here. I'm just lining it up, and I'm going to start sewing, and I'm going to do 5 stitches forward, and now I'm going to hold my quick reverse button in and go 5 stitches backwards. Then I'm going to stitch all the way to the end of the material, and I'm going to go 5 stitches backwards, 5 stitches forward, stop, and cut. So that was the manual one, and now you can see one thing that might have been annoying if I'm using a larger piece is that I had to lift my hand off my work to press and hold this button. So there's another stitch, stitch number 5. Stitch number 5 is going to work a little bit differently. As I stitch stitch number 5, it is literally going to go 5 stitches forward, 5 stitches backwards. I'm touching nothing here, okay? Now, as I get to the end of my material, I don't have to do anything until I get to the very, 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 very edge. I stop. I don't press and hold. I just press this button, and now it's going to go backwards, forwards, and come to a complete stop. And now I can press my thread cutter button, which is going to cut the thread and lift the presser foot for me. Our quilter securing stitch, which is 1324 on the Bernina 770, this one is a little bit different. So this one is for those times when you're doing straight line quilting and you don't want to have a distorted stitch or thicker stitching in a certain spot. Maybe you're doing straight line quilting and you need to stop at an embroidery design or an applique design or just something like that. So this one is literally taking 5 little stitches very, very close together. And then it starts to sew at its normal stitch length of 2.5 millimeters. Then when you get to where you want to stop, about 1/8 of an inch before you really want to stop the stitch, you stop sewing, you press your quick reverse button. It takes 5 tiny little stitches and then stops. So now we can cut, and now we've made that little tiny itty bitty stitching that is going to hide. I mean, you can't really see it, but that is a very small little stitch that it created there. So those are 3 ways to secure your stitches. There's even a little pretzel button in the I menu when you pick like a decorative stitch. If you hit that little pretzel looking button, that's a securing stitch. That's going to take a knot in your decorative stitching when you stop it or start it so that the decorative stitches don't come undone. Another thing that I'm not going to demonstrate to you, but I just want to show you is altered stitches. So if you were to use a decorative stitch foot like the number 20, 20C, or 20D, and you selected the blanket stitch, that's 1329 for the 7 and 8 series and 1309 for the 4 and 5 series, and you sew a row of stitches, but you adjust the stitch width to 3.5 and you adjust the stitch length to 4.1, you can sew that row of stitching, go back to a straight stitch, sew something else, but when you come back to that altered stitch, the machine is going to remember the stitch adjustments that you made. So this is really nice as you are sewing on a project and you need to toggle back and forth between different stitches. And here is an example. So in this example, these are our programmed stitches, exactly the way that they were meant to stitch from the factory. Here's our adjustment, and then here's where we adjusted the length. So these little work exercises are in the Mastering Your Bernina sewing machine, and they are available through a link that Chris posted in the chat. So don't be afraid to download that and do these exercises, because I think they'll really help you navigate and learn your machine. This is the temporary altered stitch memory that I talked about, where you can make all of these adjustments onto the machine and it's going to remember it for you. And whenever you make an adjustment to something, notice that it shows up yellow. So in this example, this is our blanket stitch that we adjusted to 3.5 in width, and that is how we can tell it's been adjusted, because that portion is yellow. And now is the time everybody's been waiting for, is how do I clean and oil the machine? And there is a maintenance section on page 55, but I'm going to try my best to show you here, and then this will be the end of our video. So let's go back to my machine, and I'm just going to show you a couple pieces where it's important for you to clean out your machine. All right, so the first thing to remember is to unplug your foot control so you don't sew through your fingers. And I'm going to try to turn the light on and see if this will help at all. And now I'm going to take the table off. Take my foot off. Okay, and now the next thing is I want to take my needle out. It's probably time for me to replace that one anyway. I've done a lot of sewing with it. Remember how I said to replace your needle after every 4 to 6 hours of stitching? The 4 to 6 hours is of times the needle has actually gone up and down. And also there are new types of needles, the chrome needles and the pro needles that Bernina make. They're kind of designed for longer stitching, but really more for higher speed stitching. So if you have a 7, 8 Q series machine, you should consider the chrome or the pro needles. Now I'm going to take the needle plate off. There's a little bullseye on the needle plate that makes it easier to remove this, and it's that little round spot right there on the needle plate. So you're going to push that down with your finger, and it pops the needle plate off. And these little clips that are under there, these little clips can sometimes get bent out of shape, and then they pop off. They are replaceable, so don't be too alarmed if one comes undone. I've had them actually break off on people in the middle of a guide class before, so please don't be alarmed, but you do want to make sure that they're all lined up when you put the needle plate back down. I need my little dust brush. I'm going to reach under here. You know, my entire life is missing. It's either halfway at my house or halfway at the shop. Well, let's pretend that I have a brush. The brush is going to be represented by my seam ripper. But you want to use your little brush to get all of your little fuzzy wuzzies out of there. You're going to open up your bobbin. You're going to take your bobbin out. And you're also going to release this clip that holds your shuttle race cover right here. So we're going to open that up and pull this ring down. And man, my machine, it's a good thing this camera isn't catching all of this, because my machine is fuzzy wuzzy. Whoa. So you would use your dust brush to get all of this stuff out. We even carry these little things. They're like Q-tips for sewing machines, and they're bendy, and they get in there nicely. But we're going to just clean all of that off with our dust brush. And then, now, here's the important part. You don't want to ever blow into the machine or use compressed air in here, because all that's going to do is blow the air into these bits over here where the motor is, where other parts are, and it's just not good for your machine. So always just be mindful to remove the bits out rather than blowing them deeper into the machine. So that looks pretty good. So now I'm going to grab my oil and I'm taking out the hook. Now the hook is magnetized, but it will only be stuck with the magnet when the hook is in just the right position. And so there's the hook. It's always a good idea to kind of look and see if you've got any like little scratches or icky parts on there, because if you get a scratch or if you get a burr on this, it either needs to be replaced, that's the extreme, or it needs to be buffed out by a Bernina technician. And so when we oil, there's a couple places you can put the little oils, and there's 2 white dots right in there, and you can put just a little drop of oil in there. But I also put, after I've cleaned this race out and everything, still see there's goop down there. And I don't want to oil it with goop down there. Okay. All right. So we're going to put a little drop of oil right in that ridge, right there. And then putting this back in, you want to make sure that your needle's in the highest position, just like I showed you when we used the needle threader. And then see how this has like a little opening? That doesn't go right at the top of the machine. It kind of goes to the side. And you also see how there's a hole in the hook right at the bottom, just there? That is going to line up with a silver dot that's right here on the machine. And I kind of do this 2-finger spread to hold my hook in place as I get it into the machine. There we go. This ain't easy with the camera over here. Just saying. All right, so once you get that back into place, we're going to push our shuttle race cover back on. We're going to put our bobbin case back in. We're going to close the bobbin door. We're going to put our needle plate back on. And we're going to put a new needle back in the machine. Remember, the needles are designed to have the flat piece of the needle go to the back of the machine. And I'm loosening this up, making sure I get my needle all the way into the highest position, tightening, putting my foot back on. Got to use that needle threader again. And also, there's the safety thing. Do you see how that foot lifted automatically when I threaded the needle? Don't do this. Don't thread it and then reach back there before the presser foot lifts, or you could possibly puncture your finger. Just a little safety tip. Ask me how I know that. Okay, and then once I put everything back together, I do get a little scrappy doodle of fabric, and just make sure. Oh, I unplugged my foot control for my own safety. Plug the foot control back in. And now now we're back in business. All right. Thank you for watching us today. I hope that you learned something. And we're going to be making more of these videos. And with a little bit of minor editing, we're going to be uploading this to our YouTube channel as well. So don't forget to follow us on youtube.com, BERNINA of Naperville, and like, comment, and subscribe to our stream. If you want to know when we're going to be adding new videos, you can also click the little bell, and that will give you notifications when we add new stuff. So thanks a lot, and have a great rest of your day.